Hello, I'm Antonio, and welcome back to another edition of DM's Dungeon. This time I'm going to go over a bit of my tabletop role-playing experience for you all. And I am joined by my little Grover here, so sorry for any disturbances. If it gets real bad, I will just start over. For those of you that didn't see the About Me video, which most of you probably didn't, I started having an interest in role-playing games or tabletop role-playing games when I was younger, and in the late 90s I bought the original Robotech core rulebook for the original tabletop game, and because I was a huge Robotech fan, and that was the first time I realized how these books of numbers and tables could become a game. And even though I had the book and I had interest and I would every once in a while talk to the people at the game store about RPGs, I never found a group, in part because I was never comfortable enough to DM. This was before, I think I said in the 90s already, so this was before YouTube and broadband. And it was harder to find these easy ways to, or easier, I guess, ways to learn how to DM and how the flow of a tabletop game works. Fast forward a bit and to a little bit after 2010, and I started to get more into analog gaming again after spending most of the interim playing video games. I started playing board games and card games, whether it's, worker placement, Ameritrash, deck builder, what have you. I started playing it and building up my board game collection. It's pretty big now, for me anyway. It's probably around 60 games. And that, of course, dovetailed into getting a little bit into tabletop role-playing again. Now, this coincided with actual play podcasts and YouTube series getting more popular. Specifically, I remember a few years ago listening to the first season of the Nerd Poker podcast, because I'm a fan of Brian Posehn's as a comedian. It turns out I'm a fan of a lot of his friends, too, because that first season was hilarious, and the DM, Sark, taught me a ton about what it means to run a game and be a DM, and how to truly roll with the punches and create this unique, chaotic, cooperative story. And I was hooked all over again. I immediately started doing research, and this was around the time of D&D Next, which was just starting to become known as 5th edition. As well, we always kind of knew it was 5th edition, but you know what I mean. And so after listening, I got the D&D 5e starter set, The Lost Minds of Phandelver, which is great for the record, and you can pick it up nowadays for I want to say with tax, $15 from Amazon, and it's totally worth it. If you have any questions about it, about wanting to play, it gives you everything you and a group need, and if you don't like it, it doesn't take up that much space, you don't have a ton of books you need to get rid of or spend too much money on. Anyways, I got that, I devoured the module, and having learned that in the world of tabletop role-playing, DMs are the ones that are really in demand, I decided to DM a game of my own. I felt like I had enough virtual table experience via osmosis, via these actual play podcasts and YouTube channels I had been following at this point, Nerd Poker, The Adventure Zone, Critical Role, what have you. And but I did want to get a little more practical experience. So I started playing Pathfinder. I started playing Pathfinder because at the time it was the easiest to find a game for. Again, this was before 5e had really come out, before any of the books had come out at very least. And so most of the kind of established games that you could go in and join were Pathfinder, at least, again, because that was more in tune with what I was familiar with from the podcasts, more than the 100 system of Call of Cthulhu or something like that. And so I played a little bit of Pathfinder. And to be totally honest, while I enjoyed it, there were definitely aspects I didn't like. I felt, maybe this was my group, but I felt that things were kind of rigid within that world, more than, at least again, my group, I don't know about all Pathfinder players, it was very, 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 very firmly in the world of Pathfinder, not just here's a world kind of based on epic fantasy and we're going to put our own twist on it. So there were a lot of things that weren't intuitive to me. It didn't make sense. There was I did notice the common complaint of Pathfinder that it can be easy to make ineffective character if you don't know what you're doing and aren't doing some kind of min-maxing and planning out your skill tree. You know, if you're just taking skills and spells and so forth that sound cool and useful at the time without a plan, you can make characters that aren't going to be very effective at once you start leveling up. I don't like that. That takes me out of it. That invites metagaming and so forth even more than there already is. I think, you know, it's up to the DM and the player to make spells and so forth more mechanically relevant, you know, not the rules in the book. So I tried that, and while it wasn't for me, that game at least, not Pathfinder, that specific group, I did feel I had enough under my belt to start DMing. So I reached out on Craigslist and I found a group, let them know I was a first-time DM and what kind of table I was looking for, which I thought that was important. And I'll get to more of that later in another video, probably a session 0 video. And we ran the Lost Mines of Phandelver, and it was a ton of fun. There were a lot of missteps from me as a DM. I specifically remember one battle that went on way too long. It was your stereotypical, people are just hacking back and forth at each other for an hour and a half. It was bad, and that was on me. Because I didn't do, in part because I didn't do enough to keep it interesting. It was really just that hacking and slashing back and forth. There was no other interesting mechanics to keep them involved and to add little wrinkles here or there. Anyways, that was a ton of fun, but at the end of the module, my group wanted to continue playing, and I wanted to try playing. So I switched out with another person who was playing a character before. They DM'd, I made a character. We played for a few more months. After that, the group sort of disbanded for the regular reasons. You know, people's jobs changed over the course of almost a year. Availability changed, and it got harder to get together. I, in the meantime, had started getting more of an interest in one-shots and trying to create my own campaign opposed to do things from a module. So I created what I call the Talos Rising one-shot. It's simply a one-shot about some characters that are making on a voyage for the Sword Coast to start new lives, and in their sleep, when they wake up one morning, they realize the ship has been taken over, and one of the other passengers was a priest of the storm god Talos, and he has commandeered the ship and redirected it towards an uncharted island to try and help find an artifact that will make him more powerful and claim dominion over the Sword Coast for Talos. And that was pretty fun. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed making a one-shot. I think thinking about pacing in those terms is really interesting, and it's a good exercise. And even for people that don't necessarily want to do a bunch of one-shots, I think having a couple under your belt just to have a better idea of how to keep things going organically and keep the pace up can help with pace control in even a campaign long-form game. After this, I did a game based off of the Adventure Zone, the McElroy brothers, or the McElroys, I guess, because their dad's in it too, D&D podcast. If you haven't noticed, I like the more kind of goof-filled, a bit of rule of cool, not so, here's exactly what it says in the book, so that's what we're going with kind of game. And that's one of the reasons I'm really drawn to 5e, less so Pathfinder. So I found online the resources, or at least some resources that other fans had put together to run the first Adventure Zone campaign. And I used that to, it's nice because obviously they only have what they talked about in the show. It gives you more avenues to create your own thing and kind of spin off of what is there. And it doesn't tie you down. I think sometimes if you know there's something that's supposed to happen in the book, you feel the need to make exactly those things happen. Sorry, that was a really weird way of putting it. Let's say you get confused on what happens if your party decides to go to location B opposed to location A. If you're spitballing, so to speak, you're going to be much more comfortable and already in a mindset to improvise something. If you're going off of the book, I feel you're going to be much more likely to say, oh, 1 second, what's it say in the book again? Time out, guys. I like to think of it as kind of using a calculator. I don't know about you, but if I'm doing math in my head, I'm going fine. It's like I have that problem that I can't do in my head. And then I bust out the calculator. And as soon as I bust out that calculator, my mind stops working so hard for some reason. Maybe it's just me. And I can't think, because I know I have the calculator there. It's kind of the same thing. Your improvisation part of your brain shuts down to some extent because the answer is right there if you just look it up. Anyways, I think that having only part of that information really made this campaign fun and further helped make it our own, as in that group. Now, I have another campaign that I am in the midst of writing that I would love to DM soon, maybe when I can kind of get a new group together at my new spot. It's based off the game Esper Genesis, which is a sci-fi version of 5e, written by the folks at Alligator Alley. I highly recommend it. It's great books. The only kind of independent RPG books that I've seen that are truly of the same quality as the D&D books. And I mean that in terms of binding, paper, colors, art, writing, depth, clarity of rules, all that sort of writing. It's written by a guy that has written for Wizards for 5th edition, and only the core rulebook's out so far. It's amazing. Anyways, I am writing a campaign that mixes that with the module Out of the Abyss. For those of you that don't know, Out of the Abyss is a module about adventurers getting taken prisoner by Drow and taken to the Underdark, and having to go through a little bit of a survival horror, getting out of the Underdark and dealing with all of the craziness down there, as well as finding out that there is a group trying to resurrect some demon gods that you have to stop. I want to take that module, kind of convert it to Esper Genesis, and instead of making it the Underdark, I want to make it Adventurers on a New World. It's going to have a bit of a Mass Effect, so to speak. Probably the wrong phrase. Kind of a Mass Effect feel of, you are kind of soldier scientists that are trying to do some research on this interesting new planet, and you get caught up in this crazy world of aliens and pseudo magic. And that's it. I know it's not a ton, but that's part of the point of my channel is this channel, DM's Dungeon. I'm not the most experienced. But I'm someone that's learning on the fly and trying to share that with all of you. and hope that any insight I'm able to glean from my games can be shared with the rest of you. Well, thanks for joining me. I hope the tinkle tinkle from Grover's collar here wasn't too bad on the audio, and I will see you later in the DM's dungeon.